Ready or Not review. This is an interesting horror film that's also very funny. Before watching it, I didn't know it was a dark comedy, but it becomes apparent very early, and thankfully, the jokes all tend to land. The horror aspect is done well too and leads to the film sort of having a Shaun of the Dead vibe, which I love. Also, the ending is great and they handle the kids in it in a really rather great way. However, I would have personally preferred a bit more mystery about the veracity of the curse rather than having it confirmed either way. Also, the movie is very streamlined story-wise while still allowing the characters to truly shine through, especially Grace and Daniel. Overall, it's a fun film that I'd highly recommend that doesn't contain much to talk about because of how short it is. I just wanted more, and that was my I Spit on Your Grave review. This is a conceptually better film than the one that ended up being executed. Somewhat inspired by real events, this film, in my opinion, fails to truly comment sufficiently on the issues that it brings up. The pioneer of the rape and revenge genre, this film is most famous for the longest rape scene in history, which doesn't help the film. The scene is suitably horrible, and it's nice to know that the guys portraying the pieces of shit wanted to show solidarity with Camille Keaton. She's excellent in the film, by the way. Absolutely make sure that you feel the weight of the heinous attack. But I feel that the film loses its way to focus on a revenge rather than the repercussions of the traumatic event that just happened. Maybe it's a pacing issue, maybe I'm reading too deep, maybe I shouldn't be commenting at all, but you come to me for my opinions, and that was my honest Friday the 13th Part 2 review. This is my favourite one. Switching from a pretty generic whodunit slasher to a story about a supernatural unstoppable force really works here. I also really like the final girl in this one, probably my favourite of any Friday film, and even most of the supporting cast is great here, even the ones that don't get naked. Furthermore, the kills are great, no real life actual animals were murdered, and the cast makeup is cool. It's just a shame that this film doesn't have Jason's signature look, almost accidentally included CP, and inexplicably killed off the previous survivor, but that's just a pet peeve, I guess. Overall, though, this is a great film that understandably spawned a franchise that slowly got worse over time. It strikes a perfect balance of making you concerned for the characters whilst also entertaining you with the kills. It's a great film that I thoroughly enjoy. And that was my I Spit on Your Grave 2010 review. So, I think that this is a competently made remake of a fairly bad film. So it's bad. Unnecessary is another word, seemingly only being made so that they could make this a franchise. It all just feels a lot more inappropriate than the original because this isn't a Marvel movie. This should not be made with the intent of a franchise, as then it feels like it's downplaying the actions in the film. It makes a clear point that is then remade throughout the franchise, so the point is repetitive. As for what we see on screen, it's fairly similar and suffers from all of the same problems. It's barely worth talking about apart from Jennifer Butler's good performance. However, not even all the guys got naked in solidarity this time. Overall, this is a bleak remake of a film that didn't need to be made, and the existence of sequels cheapens the message. And that was my Wrong Turn review. Meh. This isn't the worst horror film I've ever seen, and it's not the best. If I had to sum it up in one word, then it would be generic. You've got a group of mostly unlikable teens, an absolutely stunningly obvious final girl. They're all in the woods, there's an unsettling secret about this area, the main villains are tough to kill, etc, etc. Luckily for this film though, the generic parts are still done well, so the experience is enjoyable. There's also some fun kills here, with my favourite probably being the barbed wire one. But I never really cared about the characters or their peril. The horror mostly comes from, oh, don't they look funny? And the movie is very dated. Overall, it's an enjoyable enough watch that I could see myself watching, maybe, but it didn't set my world alight. And that was my Friday the 13th Part 3 review. This is definitely the most neutral I feel about a Friday film because outside of Jason's new mask, which is great, there is nothing I feel strongly about. It's seemingly made just to be able to sell 3D back to the masses. Without that very clear gimmick, there is very little here. It just feels like everything's toned down. The nudity is massively toned down to the point where it feels like an attempt to sanitize the film. It's not necessarily a problem given how gratuitous, especially Kirsten Baker's nudity was in Part 2. But yeah, it's also indicative of the sanitization of this film that they seemingly immediately abandon in 4. I think that's best seen in the kills, as the throat slit is off screen, most of the gore is fleeting, and only Rick's kill is cool to watch. I also feel like the bikers are a problem. They feel a bit like they came right out of the Garbage Pail Kids in both tone and look. None of these automatically make the film bad, but each little block makes me feel like I didn't care enough about this film. So overall, I really just don't have a strong opinion, and that was my Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022.
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
This piece of garbage is not worth the time of me, you, or even anybody involved. And that was my Friday the 13th Part 4 review. This is a great return to form for the Friday the 13th series after the very mid-installment that was Friday Part 3. It's what I would say if this film didn't have that damn kid running around and getting on my nerves. I think it's mostly just that I hate kids in film because this is definitely an A-tier child actor. The fault isn't his. I just think that having him as a character in this series is a strange formula change that doesn't really work for me. Also, the environment didn't seem to be a great one to have a child acting in with all the TNA and makeup routines that he had to do. Especially so when you hear about some of the even more explicit stuff they wanted him to film. They really let people get away with anything, didn't they? Speaking of the formula though, this is definitely a lot more raunchy and gory than the previous film, which I enjoy. It suffers a bit from the Friday syndrome of every teen girl in the world loves to get naked in public wherever they can, but at least there was some evening out with a man butt in there, I guess. The ending of Lives are a welcome return to form, with George McFly's game ending being my favourite. Overall, this is a welcome increase in quality for the franchise compared to its predecessor, but it's not terrific either, and that was mine. The Sand review. This is a bad film, and that was mine. I'm just joking about that being the end, but it really is bad. It's cheap, badly acted, looks awful, and of course has a Playboy model that's partly naked for no reason whatsoever. There's also a black guy in a barrel for some reason, and honestly that's just the best way to describe the film. Something's happened for some reason. I don't know, it's a weird film where nothing happens apart from everybody being stupid constantly. I know it's the joke that horror characters are incredibly stupid, but even for horror these people are dumb. Also, and most disappointingly, the monster looks bad and just fucks off with barely a fight. It's absurd. Overall, this is a bad film in every essential aspect that's so devoid of anything interesting that it's tough to review. And that was my Willy's Wonderland review. I'm gonna get death threats for saying this, but this is better than the actual Five Nights at Freddy's movie that we got. Still not great though. And that's partly because the incredibly charismatic Nicolas Cage, who gives a great performance without speaking, doesn't feel overly important because of the Cardboard Crew. We have the one that matters, Cardboard number 1, the hilariously over-sexualized girl, her boyfriend who's the second half of the weirdest sex scene ever, and probably some other people that I've already forgotten about. The story is fine and it looks better than FNAF ever did, but these characters really just drag it down because it's so hard to get invested. However, I do really like the puppeteering and suits that brought the animatronic characters to life. At times it looks a little goofy, but it's mostly really good and I really appreciate things like that. Overall, it's a film that had potential, but certain elements, both budgetary and non-budgetary, stopped it from reaching it. And that was my Day Shift review. Jamie Foxx and Snoop Dogg in an action movie killing vampires. What's not to like? This film closely follows the normal guy needs money quickly storyline, but this is Jamie Foxx and Snoop Dogg in an action movie killing vampires. I don't care if the story's generic. I also feel that the child acting needs mentioning because it wasn't an insufferable drop in quality here, so that was nice. Overall, this was Jamie Foxx and Snoop Dogg killing vampires in an action movie. Of course it was a really fun experience. So long as you don't go into this with the expectation of it being the Shawshank Redemption, you'll just find a lot to enjoy. And that was my Saw review. This is an incredibly effective film that really pulls off what it's going for. They truly managed to show a masterclass in how to artistically overcome budgetary restraints. It's also arguably the best film in the series, but it's not my personal favourite. However, it does contain my favourite twist of the franchise, that's brought to another level with my favourite piece of movie music ever. Genuinely, I won't say the name of the track because it's a spoiler, but I have it in a few of my playlists. It's that good. It's also probably the tightest story of the franchise, bar X, and I can't comment on Spiral because I haven't seen it. But it's so well paced and full to their tits with interesting moments and ideas. And of course, the traps are really good, and unlike Jigsaw, they look real, possible, and really creep you out. Overall, this is a great film that absolutely justified the series of films that it kicked off. It's intriguing from start to finish, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone that hasn't seen it. And that was my The Ruler review. This film reminded me a lot of a play because it's set all in one room and barely has a cut in it. Films in just one location are extremely difficult to make and get right, and I feel like they don't quite do it here. And as is the nature of these kinds of films, that means that if it goes wrong, it goes very wrong. The conflicts and relationships feel a bit fast-tracked and the rules of the game kind of feel inconsistent. The way they kill people is also a bit too funny to watch, and that's definitely a budgetary issue. Once again though, I have to talk about the very strange sexual turn that this movie takes. One of them takes their top off for no reason. They're all in this outfit that leaves very little to the imagination, and there is a semi-necessary, I guess, sex scene that involves the director and writer of this film, and that always just feels like they liked one of the actresses a little bit too much in my opinion. Overall though, this is a film that definitely had potential, as it's a good idea, but budgetary restrictions and weak writing don't allow it to fully realise that potential, and that was my Saw 2 review. This is a very different film to the original, and it mostly works, but can feel a little disconnected at times. For the positives, I really enjoyed the focus on John Kramer and how much of a petty he is towards Detective Matthews. I also really like the characters in the Nerve Trap house. It's an interesting mix and leads to some great moments in the film. However, I really dislike that outside of the opening, there's only really one true Saw trap, which is the furnace one, and everything else is just a trap. What I mean is that they feel less like specific traps made to test their players, but more like random traps that anybody could make. Essentially, most of them lack the wacky hijinks that make it a Saw trap, but the ending twist of the film is suitably good, even if its location is incredibly strange. Overall, I do like this film, but it's towards the bottom of my favourite Saw films, because whilst it definitely feels more like a Saw film than Saw 3D and Jigsaw, it still feels a bit disconnected from the series in multiple aspects, and that was my Hostel review. This is an alright film that has a fair bit of depth to it, but also didn't light my world on fire. I really appreciate that they made the protagonist as unlikable as possible and then made you feel bad for them when they're in the room. It's also an interesting parallel that they drew between the room and how they treated the workers in Amsterdam. Certainly made the crazy levels of horniness in the first act feel purposeful. And I mean crazy levels of horniness. I don't usually call out that sort of thing, but even I was thinking that they kind of took the piss a little. And then they used it to make a good point, and it's a great use of nudity as a storytelling device. As for the meat and potatoes of this film, I think we personally don't spend all that much time in the facility, which is a shame. And when we leave it, it kind of just feels like a generic action movie rather than a horror film. However, overall, it's still an interesting watch. The effects are really good, and it does make you really uncomfortable and delivers some genuine horror. And that was my Saw 3 review.
Don't worry, this review is going to be faster than Sparse motherfucking Jeff.
This film certainly felt like a positive step in the right direction for the Saw films, with John and Amanda's relationship finally getting started in earnest. It's not as good as it is in Saw X, but it's decent nonetheless. Seeing how they clearly care for each other but have principles that neither wants to compromise on, with it all coming to a head in the final moments, make it brilliant to watch. However, the twist is not as good here as it is in other Saws, and started the, oh, we just pulled this twist out of our asses of Saw 5, 7 and Jigsaw especially. Having said that, the traps are truly back with a bang, even if it contains the trap that feels the most out of place for a Saw trap ever, with a personal favourite of mine not being the rack, but the rotten pig carcass one, which I believe means that me and Tobin Bell shared the same favourite trap. It truly makes the Saw franchise feel like Saw again and gets me excited for the next instalment, even if the ending was a bit too quick for me. Overall, this is a good film and a good Saw film, unlike the previous instalment that was just a good film. But it's not close to my favourites of the franchise, and that was my The Joy review. From the amazing world of Gumball, this is the definitive way to do zombies for kids. Make it funny and mysterious, but when it comes to quote-unquote zombies, take it seriously. Genuinely, if you just replace the rainbows with blood and tweak the lighting a little bit, this is better than most of The Walking Dead, and they do this all in 10 minutes. It's also a masterclass in how to use a deliberately unlikable side character in a show. It's fantastic from start to finish, as is the show as a whole, to be honest. But overall, this episode's a masterpiece, yet probably not even a top 5 episode of the show, so go and watch it right now. And that was my Saw 4 review. I think that this is better than 3, but still not top 3 in the series. John Kramer's corpse is the best opening in the franchise, especially when Hoffman gets his tape, but then the movie slowly goes downhill. This twist accomplice is strange given how little time we spend with them. The focus on Rig is kind of weird too, but it's made up for by the limb flinging trap is an S tier trap for sure, and none are below a B tier, even if some of the reasons for people being there are a bit dodgy, mate. The one thing I really like is how well the stories flow into one another by this point in the series. They've really nailed it down, and I think it's the best intertwining of the cop plot and the trap pot in a single movie for my money. Overall, this is a good film and a good Saw film, but it's not one of the greats, and that was my Halloween Pussy Trap Kill Kill review. Now this is a film that's so bad it's good. It is what I would say if it didn't have the Jared Conn special in it. If you don't know what that is, then watch my Locked Up review. It's now 3 for 3 in movies of his that I've watched, but this film was a balls to the walls Saw inspired fever dream containing some of the most clinically insane characters of all time. I actually most enjoyed the ending of this film purely because it demonstrated that JC has some balls. It's rather short too, and there's so much to it that it never really drags, and every scene has something fun in it, whether that be intentional or not. So overall, I'd recommend that you experience this film, as despite its many flaws, this movie definitely can be enjoyed. And not to be too negative, but I'd argue you'd enjoy it more if you and some friends are drunk. And that was my Doctor Who Oxygen review. As a self-described socialist, I love this episode. This is a well-written episode with a clear message that I don't think would ever suit another modern Doctor. Besides maybe Shooty, it is also a perfect way to bring zombies into Doctor Who, mostly because actual zombies wouldn't really mesh that well. But the corpses of murdered employees being piloted by suits is absolutely quintessential Doctor Who. It's also phenomenal that the BBC didn't heavily censor this episode, but I'm not complaining. The story is properly built up to, everything has reason, and the political message is central to the resolution, something that certain other Doctor Who episodes from season 15 could have dealt with. It is a perfect demonstration in how to do a politically heavy message, and it's not just because I agree with the message. It's a 10 out of 10 episode for me, and that is my honest A Nightmare on Elm Street review. Wes Craven, you've done it again. This is cinema. An absolutely iconic slasher film that's packed to the gills with iconic imagery and an amazing villain. This is an old horror movie that absolutely justifies both its reputation and the mountain of sequels that followed. Starting off with one of the greatest kills that I've ever seen in a horror movie, the film just never ceases to be great until you get to that absolutely confusing and god-awful ending that Wes Craven didn't want. R.I.P. King, you deserve to have the ending that you wanted. I also really like the inclusion of figures such as the parents and the police, which is fairly unusual for a horror film of this ilk. Having them there really adds to Fred Krueger's threat as you realise that even all of the protection in the world can't save you. But I am glad they changed his name from Fred to Freddy moving forward. Overall, this is a fantastic film that really lives up to the hype it's built up, and I highly recommend you seek it out if you've never watched it. And that was my Prom Night review. I'm gonna be honest, I don't see what everyone sees in this film. It might be because of its age, but it just felt like any other slasher. You have your masked killer, your naked girls, your red herrings, all that not to mention that basically every kill bar one is essentially off-screen or weirdly edited. But don't worry though, because the rest of the film really drags, and you'll wish for it to be over sooner than it is. The characters feel like they either had no discernible character or they were way over the top. It was so bad I thought Jamie Lee Curtis's boyfriend and brother were the same person for like half of the movie. Overall, I don't recommend that you watch this because I just found it really painfully, excruciatingly boring, which is the only word that accurately captures my feelings towards this film. And that was my Doctor Who Blink review. Blink is one of the best episodes of television written ever. Written by Stephen Moffat before he went insane. It's actually amazing how ballsy this episode is. I know that Doctor Light episodes are a staple of the show, but to introduce a monster like this in an episode like this was a brave decision, and it pays off massively. Obviously, Carey Mulligan is fantastic and really helps endear you to Sally Sparrow, but this is also probably the best written episode in terms of dialogue.
It was raining when we met.
It's the same rain.
That line always gets me. It says so much in so little. As for the angels themselves, they're the best revival monsters by far. It's such an interesting concept that then gets ruined by their next appearance, but here they're absolutely terrifying. Overall, this is an all-timer episode of Doctor Who that comfortably sits in my top 3 stories. It's just got a little bit of everything and is absolutely iconic. And that was my Revenge review. Slightly longer one as I have a lot to say. But first things first, Corelli Faja is one of the most exciting writer-directors around at the minute, and it's hilarious how she essentially came out of nowhere to drop a banger, to then do the exact same thing but improved 7 years later. This film is so stylized and well directed that I almost don't believe that IMDb shows anywhere near her full catalogue. Her writing, style and confidence all scream seasoned veteran. The fact that the movie is as tense as it is with only 4 characters and a main character that doesn't speak after 30 minutes shows how well crafted this film is. Faja subverts your expectations by using a sexually expressive character to display that it shouldn't matter. Rape is wrong no matter who it's done to or by. Unlike some films that only use a so-called perfect victim to make it seem worse. Jen's played by Matilda Anna Ingrid Lutz, fresh off starring in Rings, which I'm reliably told is either not good or bad, depending on who you ask. And she, along with Vaj's direction, really tell a very visually strong story, with interesting decisions, especially when it comes to Jen's body, how it heals, how she's impaled, her clothing, etc, etc. Also, when it comes to the three guys, I like how each of the pieces of filth is seemingly used for different types of people involved in assaults. You have the enabler, the bystander who refuses to intervene, and the snivelling rapist. It excellently shows that rape is not a case of people just being advantageous, but there are systems that both protect and enable the act to be carried out with impunity. Also, again, unlike other movies in the genre, I Spit on Your Grave, there isn't a focus on excruciatingly dragging out the assault for no reason. Those films really just do it so they can say that they have the longest rape scene in history, and then spend much less time on the revenge portion. Here, not only do we spend much more time with Jen's revenge, which is still extraordinarily difficult, painful, and injurious for her, which is almost certainly a metaphor for the difficulty in acquiring justice in the real world, but every scene of nudity in this film feels like a deliberate choice, both female and especially male. The image of a muscular, angry rapist enabler hunting down a scarred woman really encapsulates the entire movie. Overall, this is a pretty great movie that avoids the pitfalls of many films in this subgenre of horror, combining an excellent script and director with brilliant performances. In fact, I only have one complaint, and that's the dream sequences, really. Other than that, I was engaged for every moment of this fantastic piece of media, and that was my Carrie review. A depressingly timeless story about bullying, religious fanaticism, and the moment in American snaps. It is interesting how the story is seemingly more relevant now than ever before, and that really gets at the heart of the issue that I have with the other adaptations of Carrie. Not only are they seemingly worse made, worse looking, and toned down content-wise, they just have no reason to exist because this film still holds up perfectly fine, partly because Stephen King made a timeless story. The cast here all sell you on their performances, none of the other adaptations change much apart from a bit of extra rampage. But if you keep the teacher alive, then that removes so much of what makes the rampage interesting in the first place. Overall, this is probably the definitive version of Carrie that absolutely succeeds in what it was trying to do. I have no idea why they're making a TV show about it apart from money, but I really doubt it will live up to this adaptation. And that was my Halloween review. Unsurprisingly, the same director that brought us The Thing delivered a great slasher full of suspense and some really cool directional choices, so it's clear to see why and how this movie has stood the test of time. The opening sequence is so genuinely brilliant, especially when you factor in the technical limitations of the time. Further shown by the absolutely beautiful shot with Michael's mask slowly becoming visible to the audience. It's one of the most iconic shots in horror history, and it's clear to see why. Also, I find it funny that this movie gets lumped in with moral messaging movies just because the final girl is a virgin. It seems to annoy John Carter, and he's very funny when he's annoyed or has a strong point to make, so I like it. On that note though, what struck me about this film was just how not graphic this film was. The way some people go on, you'd think that this film was hostile. But apart from PJ Soul's not whole goals, Nancy Kai's panties, and Sandy Johnson's everything, it's not even as raunchy as Friday 1. And don't get me started on the kills. Gore-wise, they aren't even remotely close to a level of something like even Prom though. I still dislike that film, by the way. Halloween's kills just decide not to make you uneasy through excessive reliance on gore or nudity. They do it by great filmmaking. Overall, John Carpenter has done it again and delivered onto us cinema. Whilst the limited budget does very clearly hinder the film, it's clear to see why this is, regardless, a classic. And that was my